covering an exciting adventure today, one that's suitable for most reasonably fit people. We're taking a bike and boat trip from Venice down to Mantua, or in the case of our guest, from Mantua up to Venice, as the ship sails back and forth each week during the boating season. I'd never heard of Mantua before, but it turns out it is Europe's greatest wetland preserve, so you're liable to see tons of the migratory birds that go through and the resident flamingos that stay there year-round. It's a beautiful area off the beaten path. And of course, we're in fabulous Italy, one of most people's favorite European countries, where the food is always outstanding. They don't know how to make a bad meal there. It's an exciting adventure. I can't wait to share it with you. So let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. I'm excited to share our Italian adventure today. Our guest went with my affiliate, boatbiketours.com. If you email me, I'll be happy to send you an exclusive €50 discount code good off of any of their amazing European tours, where you are unpacking once and cycling either with or without an e-bike all across Europe in some amazing places off the beaten path at a very affordable rate. It's a great and fun way to see Europe. I personally have taken two of boat bike tours, one to Greece and one to Croatia, and love them both. I'm trying to figure out which is going to be my next one. And if you've got some ideas of which one you'd like, maybe we can go together. Hit me up at kit@activetraveladventures.com, and maybe we can put together a little group. And I should mention that our guest today did reserve with their friends the entire ship, but that's not necessary. You could do it like I did with my sister, where we just joined a particular week to do the adventure that we wanted to do, and we got to meet people from all over the world. Or you could do like they did, and they just planned far enough in advance that they just commandeered that whole ship and had it just for their friends back home to make a really fun, relivable vacation with their friends that they get to reminisce with as the time and years go by. So with that, let's get on with the show, and let's hear more about a bike and boat trip from Venice to Mantua in Italy. I've asked Elizabeth and Bruce to come on the program today to tell us about a bike and boat trip that they took in Italy up from Mantua all the way to Venice. Welcome to the program. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. So I'd like to ask people how they first got into adventure travel, where you're not just going to a city and looking at the museums and all that, where you're actually physically doing something. Had you done trips before that you had, this trip you're biking, that you'd done an active adventure in the past?
Well, we've done a number of bike and barge trips. And the way it started was we have a group primarily from our ski club at home that cycles during the summer. And as we were cycling locally, people kept saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could go to Europe and do the same kind of thing? So one of our members found the bike and barge trips, and we started doing those in 2017 and continue to do them every couple of years.
What is it about the bike and boat trips in particular, in addition to the cycling, that makes it fun?
We go with the whole group. We book the entire barge, and so it's a trip with all of our friends. We already know each other. We know each other's idiosyncrasies. And it's just, you don't have to pack and unpack. You just unpack the one time, and then the barge is your floating hotel for the whole week. There's something different every day, and it combines sightseeing with some activity that we love.
Very cool. And then how did you choose this particular trip?
So initially, the group decided that they wanted to try it out. So they picked initially a trip in Holland, which is very flat and easy to cycle. And a couple of the members of the group are of Dutch origin, so they spoke the language. So that was sort of where we started. And then we did this particular trip in Italy following that and really loved it.
Very cool. And this one actually, too, from what it looked like, seems to be fairly flat because you're in the wetland area of Italy. So you're kind of almost at sea level. Is that correct, or did I get that wrong?
No, you're not wrong. The trip itself is along the Po River, basically. So because it's on a river bank, you're generally on fairly flat ground. Italy's a little bit hillier than Holland would be, but it's still very flat. The trips are designated as level 1s, 2s, 3s, and this was a level one because, in terms of simplicity and ease of travel, is not as strenuous on the cyclists.
So I had never heard of Mantua until I was looking into this tour itself, but it looks like that was a pretty cool city. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what you saw there? And would you recommend that people get there a little bit early to do some extra sightseeing?
It was a charming little town. I think most of our group just arrived on the day that we were meeting the barge, but we had lots of time to explore the town. There was a beautiful church there that was all lit by candlelight, and that was really a highlight. Also, just by coincidence, the day that we were there exploring the town, there was a rally of cars. Bruce, what kind of cars were they?
Most of them were antique racing cars, that sort of thing. So a lot of people took an interest in that. The Le Mans driving tour goes through Mantua and ends there. So they had an actual race that ended there just when we were arriving.
Oh, that's fun. Also, in doing my research, there's a family called the Gonza family that were back in the Renaissance era. So you have a lot of architecturally interesting buildings in this city.
It's a small walled city, so the perimeter walls, of course, have been exceeded by the population. So the population lives outside the walls as well as within the walls. But the old city is really interesting. It's got sort of a moat around it and some small lakes and canals, and it's really a picturesque little town with lovely shops and places to visit.
And I did see too, so this bike and boat either starts or ends in Venice. And so you can take about a 2.5 hour train ride to get to Mantua. So that way it's very easy depending on which week that you want to go because the barge is going back and forth throughout the season.
That's right. The barge will start in Venice, go to Mantua, and then back from Mantua to Venice on the second week. So they go back and forth with different groups.
Okay. And so when exactly did you do this? What month did you do it?
September.
Yeah, I think we went in September, that particular trip. And it's good to go in the shoulder seasons because of course, Italy would be very warm in July, August. So I would recommend going in May, June, or September, October.
Even looking at the weather, both for the weather, and then also you're going to have a lot more of the cruise crowds in the summer. So you're going to have the heat in July, August as well. And the prices were better too. I noticed if you go in the early spring, the summer high season for Venice, it actually goes up. And then you have that nice window at the fall season, which is a nice time to go as well, like you said. How about giving us a brief overview? So it's a 1 week start to finish trip. So like I said, the barge is going back and forth over the course of a week. Can you give us an overview of like what is a typical day like?
Well, you start on the barge with a self-serve breakfast, and at the same time, you pack your own lunch. And then shortly after breakfast, you take off on your bikes and ride through the countryside, through small towns, whatever the itinerary of the day is, and generally stop a couple of times in the morning. And then you stop and find somewhere for your picnic lunch that you've packed yourself. Same thing in the afternoon. Then eventually you meet the barge. And with this one in particular, we had fabulous Italian chefs on board who always had some kind of aperitivo, a drink and a snack for us when we would get back from our day of cycling. And people then relax for a little while, get cleaned up, have their showers, and then it's dinner time on the boat. That's another great thing about these trips, that basically all of your meals are included. Sometimes there's one lunch or dinner that is not included if you're in a very interesting town where people want to go off to the little restaurants. But typically, dinner is also on the barge. And then after dinner, depending where you are, you either go for a walk in the town or just relax on the boat. And one of the most wonderful things about our particular trip was our guide, Tammy, who not only knew all the sights and was great fun, but she also played the guitar. So we would often have a sing-song after dinner on the boat.
Very nice.
And Tammy was fluent in several languages, which was very helpful as well. And in fact, while you're eating dessert, usually the guide typically will go through the itinerary for the next day. So she will basically tell you what you're going to, maybe not all the secret little places that you see, but she'll tell you more or less the route you're taking and the stops you'll be making the next day.
And according to the itinerary, it looks like on any given day, you're going 15 to 33, 35 miles, which you have the whole time to get there. So with the breaks and all that, it's more like a leisurely ride. It's not like the Bataan Death March on a bike, right?
That's right. It's a very leisurely ride. We usually stop for coffee about an hour and a half after we leave the boat, and we stop for lunch about an hour after that. And then, of course, we stop for breaks as needed along the route in the afternoon. And as I mentioned, there's little sites that you see day to day en route. So we stop and see those as well.
And it looked like on this trip, I've done the Croatia bike and boat, and I've done a Greek island, the Saronic Island bike and boat. Both of those I highly recommend. You seem to have more of tour stops and little going to a cheese factory, you did more activities than I experienced on mine. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you saw?
Well, we haven't done the Croatia trip, but we'd like to do that one. That would be a really nice one to do. On this particular trip from Mantua to Venice, I think our favorite day was the day we stopped at the Grana Padano factory where they make the cheese, and they gave us a tour of cheese storage areas. You're not permitted in the actual cheese manufacturing area because, of course, we've been cycling and we're not all that clean. We'd be non-hygienic in that particular environment, but we did get to sample the cheeses, and they brought out wine, and we had wine and cheese outside on a lovely picnic area. And then we toured through the storage facilities, and we had an excellent guide. It was really well done.
And on that same day, we stopped in Bergantino, where there is a carnival ride. The whole village is dedicated to this carnival ride manufacturing. It's a museum. We had a tour of that. They ran some of the old crank-driven musical installations, and that was absolutely fascinating. I think that one day was probably the most interesting in terms of sights. We started that day, we stopped at a cat sanctuary out kind of in the middle of nowhere, but people had built these little homes for cats. We stopped and visited the cats. Then we went to the carnival town, and then we went to the Grana Padano factory.
Very fun. And it sounds like a lot of the street organs that were featured in that museum too are working organs that I read something about. It was loud that you could actually hear the piping of the organs.
Yeah, the young guide that we had was excellent. She took us through and showed us all of the fairground rides that had been created there, many of which are rides that are very common in North America in theme parks because they were originally designed there. And then the street organs themselves are fascinating because they're so ancient. We don't have them here. I've never seen one before. And she was able to play music on almost all of them. And it was really actually quite fascinating to see.
Very nice. You also got to see a lot of historic areas too. I read in one place that you were, let's see, I'm going to always mispronounce all these places. On your second or third day to Governolo, you were in an area where there was a famous battle where the Allies were able to push back Hitler.
Yeah, I don't think we focused on that so much on our trip in terms of the actual war battle area, but we did go through there obviously, and it was very scenic. It was a wetland area, and you could see a lot of waterfowl in the wetlands, and it was just a really picturesque ride through there. It was sort of a levee that we went across.
Yeah, I'm seeing something about the follow the levee to Ostiglia or something like that. And there's some kind of a medieval fortress.
Right, and that's where I think the Allies fought the Nazis at that point, but we didn't focus on that. I don't remember the guide really focusing on that particular aspect. However, Italy's so historic and there's so many things to see and do, it's easy to sort of miss one aspect of it. And also, if the guide's up at the front and you happen to be at the back of the cycling group of 20 people, you may not hear absolutely everything she's pointing out at that point in time.
Gotcha. Now, in your ride, do people get stretched out or do you kind of stay together, or how does all that work?
Typically, you have the guide, in this case, Tammy, led the group, and there were 22 of us, I believe. And we have a sweep, which is the person who follows at the end of the line, if you will, and ensures that no one falls back or gets lost and everybody's accounted for as you're riding along. So that sweep generally stays at the back and wears a vest so that Tammy at the front can see them from afar, if you will. People typically should ride in a row rather than tandem or in group bunches. So you ride in a single file line as much as possible.
I noticed too in ours, whenever we got to an intersection where there might be data as to which way to go, front guide would assign somebody just to direct people to make sure everybody made the right turn and nobody got lost.
That's right. Especially if the group is spread out a little bit, you want corners so that no one goes astray and goes the wrong way. And that never happened on this ride. Everybody was pretty close together and we never had any issues like that.
Gotcha. Now, you're on quiet country lanes, or what kind of surface? And tell us a little bit about the roads or the paths that you're on.
Typically, it was, yes, quiet country lanes. One point in the trip, we did have to cross a fairly busy bridge with traffic. And what they did is they lined us up and we went in groups of 3 or 4 riding on the shoulder. But that's the only time we were really in traffic. The rest of the time, we were sometimes on bike paths, sometimes on quiet lanes. And in particular, when we were riding towards the Po Delta, it was kind of like what we would call a conservation area. It was just a big open space with like a bike path to ride on.
I'm glad you mentioned the Po Delta. So according to my research, that's the second largest wetlands in Europe and is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw there?
Well, it was really beautiful. I think that was probably my favorite day of cycling because we literally were riding along a bike path through the wetland. At one point, there was this bay area that was covered in flamingos. Unfortunately, they were all a little bit far away from us, so the photos don't show them too well, but there must have been hundreds of flamingos standing in this bay. And as we rounded the corner, we came to an area where the fishermen would leave their nets and huts and things. And it just got more and more flat as we were approaching the actual river mouth.
Yeah, so when we came to the Adriatic at the Po Delta, as Elizabeth said, they're mussel fishermen, for example. We were able to see them bringing in the nets full of mussels from the sea and bringing them into shore for market. It's very interesting, actually.
Very interesting. And so you also went to Chioggia. How do you pronounce that? I've actually been there. I went there before my Venice.
Yeah, I think it's
Chioggia. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce any of these. So Chioggia, and that I've been there. That's a colorful, beautiful little village.
It is. It's absolutely beautiful. We had time there where we parked and locked up our bikes and we all just wandered in Chioggia. And apparently that's a custom, I think it's called Passagea, where sort of late afternoon towards sunset, everyone comes out and wanders in the town square. And we were there to take part in that. It really is a charming place.
And just very colorful, as I recall.
Yeah.
Each of the houses and buildings are all just different colors. So if you have time, if you're going to be anywhere near the Venice area, I think I took a train or a bus or something from there and stayed there a few days before I headed up to Venice. But you got to explore by bike, which is pretty cool too.
Yeah, it was a really nice way to enter the Venice area by bicycle, and then of course coming in by boat and at the end was really nice, rather than approaching it from the other side by train or by car. So it was a nice way to come into Venice.
For sure. So would you say that you're mostly in the countryside on this, or going through little hamlets or villages, or what would you say the mix is between just being out in the wild landscape versus being in little towns?
Well, I think you could safely say that the boat always docked at a small town, at least a place where we could go to shore and sightsee a little bit. But it's still very rural. It's not an area that's, big cities or anything like that. It's very quaint. So I would say that it's rural, but you always have something to do in the evenings if you want to go to shore.
And it sounded less touristy once you're away from that Venice area. lesser visited, say, by the average.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's a bit of a culture shock when you come into Venice at any time because it's always very touristy and busy. But where we were prior to that on the trip, it was very quiet. And we had, you never would have trouble getting into a restaurant or a pub or anything like that in the evening, nor would you have lots of crowd on the bike paths or anything like that.
And so after dinner, you were in these villages so you could go explore?
Yes. So typically after dinner, the guide, in this case Tammy, would take us for a walk. Though, I mean, it was optional. People didn't have to go if they didn't want to, but some chose to stay on the boat and have a glass of wine. Others went to town for some exercise, just walked around, saw the sights. And she often had scouted out a spot where we could go for a drink if we wanted to, or some shops that were interesting that we could go in and sightsee.
Very nice. And like I said, we mentioned earlier about the food. I don't think in Italy I ever had a bad meal. They just do food right.
The food was so good on the boat. They actually have a cookbook, and at the end of the trip, they gave each of us one of their cookbooks that had many of the meals that they'd prepared for us. Every meal was exceptional on the boat. The Italian chefs are great. One other thing that I didn't mention earlier about the food on the boat, it was also the drinks on the boat. They have wine and beer, and it's very reasonable. You purchase, for example, a bottle of wine, you just put your room number tag on it, and you save it from night to night, unless you drink it all one night. But it was like a self-serve bar where you would just help yourself, and at the end of the week, you would tally up everything that you had drunk and pay the bill.
Nice. And outside of gratuities and alcohol, it's pretty much all inclusive outside of your one night dinner in Venice, which it makes it you know what you're going to spend for the most part, and it's a very affordable trip, I find.
Very affordable. Yeah. It's kind of shocking when we look at other types of trips and compare to the prices that we've been paying on these bike and barge trips. It's definitely an affordable way to travel.
For sure. And I like the idea, like you mentioned earlier, Elizabeth, that you're only unpacking once. So you're not wasting all that time checking in, checking out, and you get set up and that's it. The rest of your time is just having fun.
That's right. Absolutely. And that's a real attraction for a lot of the group that we go with. They enjoy the fact that once they've settled into their room, they don't have to worry about packing for a week. It's our home away from home for the week.
And the rooms might be small, but I found it to be comfortable.
Yeah, the rooms in our boat were not that small, really. I mean, they were completely adequate for a couple. I mean, you wouldn't want to spend a lot of time in there, but for the time you're in the room sleeping and showering and so on, it's perfectly adequate.
And you don't have to necessarily book the whole boat. In my case, I was going by myself, or in one case with my sister, and we just met other people that were also interested in doing the same trip at the same time. So you're unique in that you just commandeered that whole boat.
That's right. Yeah. I think ordinarily people would just sign up for themselves, and then you meet a whole group of like-minded travelers.
Right. And the speak at least English and German. And in your case, Tammy speaks what she said, 5 languages. So we didn't find communication an issue at all, even though people from all over the world on my boats.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Tammy herself is from Holland, so she speaks Dutch, obviously, English fluently. Her mother was Italian or is Italian, and so she speaks fluent Italian as well, and she spoke German as well. So she was very, very, very handy to have on the trip.
Yeah, I've been hearing some nice things about Tammy. I hope to meet her in person one day. One other thing too I like about these boat and bike trips is that, let's say you and your traveling partner aren't of the same physical ability. On a bike and boat, somebody could stay on the boat that day and just take a cruise if they didn't feel like riding, or they could get an e-bike. So there's options there, which I like.
That's right. With our group, we have some older members in our group, and each year, actually, more of our group opt for the e-bikes. The first trip we did, maybe only 3 or 4. By the second trip, it was more like 7 or 8. And we have a trip coming up this spring where I think 12 people are taking the e-bikes.
I like it. I booked the e-bike myself on both of mine because it gave me options. I could keep it in eco mode and so you still have to pedal even with an e-bike. It just gives you a little extra oomph if you're going up a hill or if it's a bit long, you want to take a little break.
Yeah, I think so. And also in Croatia, where you were, I think it's a little hillier than where we were. So it probably would benefit for everybody to have an e-bike there, just in case you did, reach a hill that was quite challenging.
Yes, there was one hill that without my e-bike, I might still be paddling up that hill. It was pretty high. So same with Greece. Greece was surprisingly much hillier than I thought it was going to be. So most of us gratefully had opted for the e-bike, but there was a few that didn't, and they won't do that again in the future.
Yeah, we've heard that about Croatia as well. Friends who
I
didn't take the e-bike wish they had.
Yeah, I would for the Croatia. It's quite hilly, but it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And again, on that one, about half did and half didn't. But there's that one day of 40 miles, it's your longest day with the biggest hill. So you're gonna want it that day for sure. And the guys will help you. Sometimes they'll come back and hold your back and help you up a hill. When you look back on this trip, what are some of your favorite memories?
Well, definitely the carnival town and the cheese factory, and probably riding into the Po River Delta was the most, I did a very spectacular sight that it would be difficult to find that anywhere else.
I think too, traveling with your friends is a great adventure that you can share the memories for years afterwards, and we certainly do. And another highlight was the crew on the boat. We had an excellent guide in Tammy, but we also had an excellent captain, an excellent cook. And that makes the trip if you have good food and camaraderie and a good guide, that really makes a difference on any trip.
And on the ship itself, is there like a deck that you can hang out to watch the sights go by? Are you covered, uncovered, or what was the ship like?
Every ship is a little bit different. This one had an indoor salon area that we dined in, but there's also an area to sit and chat if the weather was inclement. But it also had adequate space on the deck for people to sit outside as well, which we did. And many times when we came back, they would serve a after cycling snack and drink on the deck before we went in to shower and so on. So we had lots of space to sit outside as well as inside.
One thing we didn't mention yet is Venice itself.
So what was it
So,
like when you finally got into Venice?
well, as Bruce mentioned, it was really spectacular sailing into Venice as opposed to getting there by train or by any other means. So we approached by water and we stopped at the Murano glass factory and had a tour of that and watched them making their fabulous glass creatures. And Venice itself, we stayed on the opposite side of the Grand Canal from the main part of town. So to get into town and wander around involved either taking a little ferry from spot to spot. And then, of course, once in Venice, you could also take gondola rides through some of the smaller canals. And we had excellent, again, Tammy took us through town and showed us all the sights. Fortunately, we were there in one of the times when St. Mark's Square was not underwater. So it was fabulous to see the whole square with its lovely cafes and patios and shops. And she also arranged, we went up to the rooftops in one of the famous indoor kind of a mall. And she had arranged for us to have access to the rooftop gallery where we could see the whole of Venice from above. So that was beautiful too.
That's very nice. Very cool. And like 5 million visitors a year visit Venice. So that's something else too, that being on the ship and being able to see some of the sights from the way that you did it is a little bit different take than a lot of the people would be able to experience.
That's right. Most people come to Venice as a day trip on a big cruise ship or from the land side and then leave again. We were able to stay after most of the city drained out of tourists and we were on our boat so we could go in at night and we had St. Mark's Square more or less to ourselves and so on. So it was nice that way. The other nice thing about ending in Venice is that as we split up as a group and go our separate ways, some people may want to spend additional time in the Venice area or alternatively take a train to another town nearby and visit some other sites in Italy in the north there. So it's nice to end in Venice for that reason.
For sure. And it's a beautiful city. I was not quite sure I was going to like it because the big crowds are getting to. I loved Venice. I would definitely go back there again. It was beautiful and quite picturesque. It was a wonderful city
It's pretty much one of a kind.
for sure. Is there anything that you wish you had known before you'd gone over there that would be a little like an insider tip that we should know about?
Not really, because I'd been to Italy many times before. So although I hadn't done the bike and barge before, I know Italy quite well. So I didn't feel that there was anything I really needed to know before I went.
Did you love this trip?
Oh, absolutely. This so far has been our favorite trip.
Very nice. And do you have another one planned in the future?
Yes, we're going in June of this year. We're starting in Bruges and cycling to Amsterdam.
Ooh, I haven't covered that yet. We'll have to get you back on the program for that.
I think that's a big favorite of most people that we've spoken to that have done many as well.
Okay. Yeah, definitely would love to have you come back on and tell us about that.
Okay.
So, is there any other final thoughts you'd like to tell us about your Mantua to Venice boat and bike trip?
I'd just like to emphasize the importance of the crew on the boat and the guide, because they're very important to making the trip enjoyable for everyone. And we had a particularly good crew and guide on that particular trip.
Yeah, and I think a good company like Boat and Bike Tours, they make a point of making sure they get good people because of like I said, of all the trips I've had, you're getting the cream of the crop as far as the guides go. So they must be taking good care of their people to be able to retain them. And I don't know how long Tammy's been there, but I've been getting lots of accolades about her for sure.
We liked Tammy so much that the next trip we took after that, we asked if Tammy could be our guide on that trip. And they made special arrangements to have her available for us the week of the next trip.
Good to know. I'll have to do that on my next one. I haven't figured out where I'm going yet, but I do enjoy this way of traveling for many of the reasons that we've already discussed. Well, I very much appreciate your time, Elizabeth and Bruce, for coming on and telling us about your program. And like I said, I'd love to have you come back later this year and tell us about your next trip.
Okay, thanks.
It'd be a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed today's show on Venice to Mantua, or the opposite direction, with boatbiketours.com. And don't forget, if you'd like to save €50 off of any of the boatbiketours.com tours, and they've got them all over Europe, just email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and I'll get that out to you. Our adventure today sounds like an amazing trip. It's one that probably like a level 2 and a level 1 if you get the e-bike, because it's mostly flat. It's certainly something most anybody that's reasonably fit can do. The main thing you want to do on these trips is just get your rear end used to sitting on the saddle for sometimes 4 or 5 hours in a day, even though you take lots of stops. I think it's just a good idea to at least get your butt conditioned. But this is a great adventure for people to dip their toes in adventure travel, or if they just want to have an active adventure, but they don't want to have like the Bataan Death March kind of adventure. It's a wonderful way to see the country. And like I said, their tours are super affordable because they're almost all inclusive. And so you know how much you're going to be spending. And on a per diem, it really is quite affordable and very nice. I mean, you're going to love your trip. If you have any questions, be sure to check out the website where I have all of their photos. I've got more details. And of course, the travel planner comes with the monthly newsletter that you can sign up at the website, or just hit me up at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I'll get you on the list. I don't spam you or sell your name, so it's just a way for us to have a two-way conversation. I sure hope you enjoyed today's show. I do thank you for listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks.